Thank you everyone for joining our webinar. We're really excited to share our story with you guys. As most of you know, my name is Leopold de Bruin, or Leo de Bruin for short. I'm the CEO and founder of ESN Cleer. I have a background in investment banking. I worked for the big investment banks, JP Morgan, Barclays Capital, Bank of New York, and I've also had senior leadership roles in large corporates and also SMEs. I've got a chartered accountancy provisional qualification, an MBA, a master's in accounting, and also a Bachelor of Commerce. And I've studied 4 programming diplomas as well. ESN Cleer was founded to tackle the niche orphan cardiomyopathies where no treatments are available within the heart failure syndrome. And when I founded the company, not far after that, Andrew was introduced to me, and we got on like a house on fire. And this is where we are today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name's Professor Andrew Coates. I'm Australian and British. I've split my life between UK, Europe, and Australia. I am a career cardiologist. I specialise in heart failure for 35 years. I used to be head of cardiology at Imperial College Royal Brompton Hospital in London, where I set up Europe's largest heart failure clinic. Then I was president of the Heart Failure Association of the ESC. But I'm also a research academic and entrepreneur. So I have an MBA. I've got about 20 patents, formed 3 startup companies, and get very excited about the possibilities of commercialization for new treatments. So when I was introduced to Leo, I was very impressed with some of the early ideas they had around precision medicine development of specific biomarkers. And gradually through our conversations, we focused in on biomarkers that could pick up different forms of heart failure, different cardiomyopathies, and different stages of disease. And it was through that process that we came up with the concept of repurposing a drug that was known from a long way back, off patent but never marketed, so that we could target it and find specific cardiomyopathies where it played a very important role. But it was a free agent, and we developed new formulations that allowed a new IP. So a very exciting prospect to benefit very large numbers of patients, but through a selection of previously untreatable specific orphan cardiomyopathies.
So in the pitch deck, we'll cover the overview, the market, development and capital strategy, and also the team.
So the key strategic advantage we have is that we're not just developing a new drug, new chemical entity where we know that the success rate's less than 1%. And it takes many, many years to go through drug perfection, selection, target indication, toxicology, phase 1, preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and there's very little time left to actually get sales and start affecting practice. So we took drugs that I've known for many years that haven't found their optimal indication, repurposed them, resynthesized in many cases, and came up with agents that had a better benefit risk profile. Very low toxicology risk because they are well-established drugs that have been assessed in major trials in the past, but in other less valuable indications. And we, through my knowledge of the cardiomyopathies, selected certain cardiomyopathies that are both rare and therefore subject to orphan indication. Important because they're not presently treated with anything, no guidelines recommended treatments, because they don't classically respond well to traditional treatments for heart failure and other cardiomyopathies, such as dilated cardiomyopathy. So this is a de-risk repurpose strategy that leaves a much faster track to market, and you get much higher price per unit of pharmaceutical because you're going for an orphan indication that has a more powerful ability to get payers to afford. The fact that we took an established drug means that we've got a clear path through to market, but we increase value by stacking of intellectual property. So a number of patents that go for new composition of matter patents through modifications for a drug that was synthesized in a different way with different impurities 20 years ago. We focused on certain cardiomyopathies that themselves are rare, but together multiple forms of cardiomyopathy can give to a decent sized market. But restrictive cardiomyopathies are the Cinderella of the cardiomyopathy fields that no one's presently known how to treat them. And if you look at modern guidelines, there are no general treatments for restrictive cardiomyopathies. So it is a form of precision medicine, but unlike the cancer world, we're not targeting genetic subtypes, we're targeting physiological subtypes. And that's very important because the patients are out there, but presently not identified because there's nothing you can do for them. So it ends up being effectively a very late stage company that can get an agent through to approval within 2 to a few years, but with early stage company upside. Standard. So heart failure is the end stage of many separate insults to the heart. Multiple diseases, the very common ones like atherosclerosis, hypertension, some genetic heart muscle disorders, but you end up with a clinical syndrome where people get short of breath and can't exercise. And there are multiple treatments for most heart failure of the big heart variety, which we call heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, or HFrEF. There's another type related to hypertension in older people that's a small stiff heart that doesn't expand well. That's called heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. And recently there's been a new treatment for that developed, the SGLT2 inhibitors. But there's a rarer form that has a particular abnormality of the physiology function of the ventricle, the pumping chamber of the heart, and that's a restrictive cardiomyopathy. There are multiple causes of that, but so far no treatment's been shown to be effective. So these people are just treated with fluid tablets for improving quality of life. So the typical patient journey for these restrictive cardiomyopathies are that they diagnose very late. There are specific diagnostic tests that are not used because the doctors realize that there's nothing they can do for the diagnosis in the first way, in the end, because there's no specific treatment. And so they present late, they get diagnosed very late, and they get treated poorly. So if we come up with a treatment, that we've got a very fast track through to approval because it's an area of unmet need and a relatively rare condition, so-called orphan indication. The agent we've got, we can't give you the precise chemical details. If people want to go under confidentiality agreement, we can. But we're targeting forms of restrictive cardiomyopathy. But the older form of the agent has been studied in over 15,000 human clinical trials, very well understood clinical profile, well understood beneficial effects and side effect profiles. So there's no sort of hidden toxicology risk. So we have freedom to operate, and we're presently improving the synthetic quality and reducing impurities. So we're getting to a much higher purity than it was ever established in the original legacy drug. That gives us intellectual property protection. It also gives us much more confidence that we've got a good efficacy to risk ratio. We have seen results of this agent in preclinical models of some forms of cardiomyopathy, particularly animal-dilated cardiomyopathy and heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, as well as other related conditions such as hypertension. But we are presently developing and evaluating its efficacy in these rarer restrictive forms of cardiomyopathy. It's the first in class for its novel mode of action, and it has this great composition of a well-established agent, but is complete freedom to operate and no risk of generic substitution by elsewhere because it's never been approved anywhere.
So the indirect competitors we're listing here are specifically for heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, as Andrew mentioned, the big saggy heart, and diabetic drugs, the SGLT2 inhibitors. The specific cardiomyopathy drugs are very different non-competing drugs, such as mavacamten's myostatin inhibitor. Both mavacamten and tafamidis are brilliant examples of orphan indications within the cardiomyopathy syndrome that attract high prices and delivered huge valuation to the respective companies. Andrew mentioned the dilated cardiomyopathy model. One specific one was this one, where it's a 6-month-old dilated cardiomyopathy hamsters. They showed statistically significant improvement in overall survival. It was 3 groups of hamsters, each group consisting of 40 hamsters. We had an ACE group, an ACE inhibitor group. The second group was our drug, and the third was a control group. So respectively, the survival rates in the ACE group was 48%. In our drug, it was 88%, and in the control group, 0. So no hamster survived in the control group. The prolonged inhibition increased the median survival time by 99%. The heart rate, pulmonary congestion, and left ventricular chamber volume both significantly decreased compared to control. Significantly increased the LV mass to volume compared to the control group and the ACE group. So our patent portfolio is actually layered in 3 different patent families. And luckily, very, very early on, we engaged Wilson Sonsini Goodrich Rosati, or WSGR. It's one of the biggest biotech IP lawyers globally, and they have a massive VC arm as well. And so they've been creating our IP ever since. It started with the biomarkers, as Andrew pointed out. We then coupled that with treatment, so a CDX type patent. We then patented the drug, and then just the combination of the biomarkers and the drug, and then also the specific indication. So there's multiple ways of keeping competitors out. And again, I just want to make it very clear that it's not a generic drug. Repurposing can be one of two things. So repurposing a drug that's already in the market, that's generic. Our drug is not in the market. So it's best of both. We've got a drug that we resynthesized, reformulated. So we've got all the strongest patents you can possibly have, same as a novel new drug, but we've got the quick, fast, and cost-effective way of developing a drug, the repurposed strategy, because it was never marketed. So it's almost a match made in heaven. On the left, we are just showing basically 1 to 2% of adults get diagnosed annually with heart failure. In the US, that's between 4 to 8 million new patients every year. 1 in 500 adults are diagnosed with specific cardiomyopathies, and that's a very large number globally. In the US, around about 500,000 or 650,000 people. We are looking at 2 specific indications, both within the restrictive cardiomyopathy space. The first indication affects around about 150,000 new patients in the US and about 200,000 in Europe every year. The second indication is about 60,000 new patients in the US and 40,000 in Europe annually. So both indications in both Europe and US fall under the orphan drug classification. Now, in the US, our target diseases costs together about 4.2 billion annually in hospitalization costs, which excludes readmissions. Now, if we move to the blue box, I'll just step you through that. So we've got a market reference, mavacamten, and they just have US numbers currently. So I've just got the US comparative. They have approximately 200,000 patients in the US with a list price of $90,000 annually for a patient, resulting in a total addressable market of about 18 billion. They modeled their penetration rate 22%, and where we are on the journey, we've adopted the same. No reason why we would have lower or higher necessarily. Their drug was also the first in a specific type of cardiomyopathy called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Very different, but still within the same sort of umbrella. Now, our total addressable market in the US is around about the same, around the $18 billion mark on that 22% market penetration. And in Europe as well, very big market, as you can see. The key things here with the orphan drug designation with FDA and the EMA. So FDA is the US, EMA is, of course, the European regulatory body. You've got accelerated pathways. You've got great tax incentives. There are fee exemptions and then market exclusivity. So there's 7 years market exclusivity in the US, which means that even if you've got a generic, you get 7 years of market exclusivity. No other competitor will and can and will be allowed by the FDA to compete with you in the market. And it's 10 years in Europe. So if you couple that with our IP portfolio, you can see that there's a number of decades of patent protection and exclusivity that is available to us. So this slide, the orphan drug market. So the orphan drug market is growing twice as fast as non-orphan drugs. Between 2023 and 2028, it's poised to grow by 12% annually. By 2028, sales in the orphan drugs market is to reach $300 billion annually at 20% of all prescription sales. As I mentioned, you've got your 7-year exclusivity in the US, 10-year exclusivity in Europe. Non-orphan drugs are getting pressured on list price. So dapagliflozin, empagliflozin, Entresto, though not Entresto is not an SGLT2 inhibitor, but Dapa and Empa is, and they're getting list price pressures. However, only non-generic products, which have been on the market for 9 years for small molecules, are getting pressured and they're subject to price negotiation. So in the US, Medicare Part D covers 71% of costs and Medicaid covers 78%. So you've got overlap. and leaving you maybe just with a small minimal out of pocket for patients. Now, the commercialization strategy. Where we are, and really referencing back to one of the first investment highlights, was the small company upside with large company risk. I'll explain that and just expand slightly more. What do we have left to do? We've been in business for 5 years. We've spent money in R&D. We've synthesized the drug. We've developed biomarkers. We have gained partnerships and work on strategic ways to get this drug approved. But what does that mean for us today? What it means is that we've got a small bit of chemistry that we still need to finish, plausibly without any risk whatsoever. Our internal chemist and our big chemist in the Netherlands, Cymeres, don't see any reason why there's any issue there. So we're just scaling up the drug and also creating some GMP product. What are we moving towards is the IND, so the investigational new drug filing in the FDA, and the similar filing in the EMA or in the Europe region. That means we are doing an animal model, or we conducting an animal study, a rodent study in our specific indications over the next 9 months, starting in January, and that's poised to complete in September. Now, we don't expect anything to go wrong because these have been studied quite intensively with similar drugs, not the same, and we almost know what we'll find. So no real risk that we see. So that's the IND, and we plan to file that around about at the end of 2024. We plan to conduct a phase 2A study after the IND, but maybe just before that, we've got the chemistry, we've got the animal study, and then filing the IND. Once we file the IND, we are very ripe for an acquisition. So even before we enter a phase 2A trial. Now, the phase 2A trial can kick off just a few months after the IND is approved, and we believe that the IND can be approved early 2025 if we file at the end of next year, basically. Now, once we get to the phase 2A trial, very similar to mavacamten, this is not a massive trial at all. Mavacamten's phase 2A trial was only 30 patients and ran only for a few months. The reason why it's small is because it's orphan, of course. It's an orphan indication that brings down the cost and the size of the clinical trial. But also, you're not targeting endpoints such as hospitalization and death. So because the endpoints are maybe as KCCQ and exercise tolerance, it's shorter clinical trials. We're talking 3 to 6 months, maybe for not even a 6-month trial for a phase 2, and a modest amount of patients, maybe 30 or 50 in a phase 2A. So once we've completed our phase 2A, we believe that's the point that ESN is the perfect acquisition target between getting an IND approved and doing the phase 2A trial. Then we'll be ripe for a pivotal trial. Now, after that, followed by an NDA filing and then market approval after that. We have an out-licensing model, and we plan to license the drug to pharma after the IND approval or just when we've kicked off the phase 2 potentially. And as I said, that's a perfect time to be acquired. The milestones depicted are targets based on advice from consultants such as Cymeres in Europe, Syngene in India, one of the top 10 CROs in the world, LabCorp, one of the biggest CROs globally, and other regulatory consultants we have internally. And all of them believe these milestones are achievable in a modest amount of capital to be deployed. Andrew touched on this earlier. So really what we're showing you there is streams. It's a novel drug stream. You've got the repurposed drug and then ESN Cleer strategy. So the novel drug takes 10 to 15 years, several hundreds of millions of dollars or euros to do, and 1% chance of success. Very risky, very long, very costly. A repurposed drug, so for argument's sake, let's just say a generic. It's shorter, but you still need to prove clinical trials. It's still costly. There's still quite a significant amount of time that needs to lapse, etc. With our strategy, because this drug is so well understood, it's been in so many humans, 15,000, it's been in many different animal models, it's well understood in many related indications. It makes our path or regulatory pathway so much simpler. We still need to prove it works in humans. But from a preclinical perspective, it's really just chemistry. The rodent model is more for investors and to get into a next raise for the clinical trial. That keeps our costs down and our time down. Makes it more exciting to invest in, I guess. So on this slide, we just show a few of the lead investors that we're very proud of. Our first lead investor, of course, our Professor Andrew Coates. He came in 4 years ago, roughly, Andrew, if I'm not mistaken. Andrew's invested several times, significant amounts. And we've got Associate Professor Tai Loy Ling, Associate Professor Sid Baxi, who works for Genesis Care, and Professor Martin Gallagher. That's our KOL group currently, and we are expanding that. We are looking for more key opinion leaders on our capital register. Now, more institutional investors on the left, I have mentioned Wilson Sonsini, but they've got a very big VC arm. They've invested in Netscape at its IPO, Yahoo, Apple, etc. But they are very focused biotech IP lawyers, and they've actually invested in us as well, which is a great level of confidence and support for our IP portfolio at large. And then the second significant institutional investor is Jinding Investments. It's predominantly a global property developer, but they do have an investment arm that's invested in healthcare, in tech, and many other areas. So to get onto Capital Cell, most of you know we've got to go through a due diligence with the Ben Network. There's a review, and then it's followed by a rigorous due diligence where specific expert companies do due diligence on your IP, on your finances, on your regulatory pathway, market access. But also then the portfolio company, ESN Cleer, gets sent out to reviewers to take a look at all the various aspects of the business. And these experts then go and they rate you and they give you feedback. Some of the feedback that we got was just outstanding. There's many experts left a very good review, but I think the key takeaway here is out of the 415 companies that's been reviewed by the Ben Network, ESN was in the top 6%, so literally within the top 20 companies of that. And it comes down to the very specific niche market we're targeting and the drug that we're using to do so. So we've got the IP upside, but the risk is minimal. We've got the timeline that's shorter, the cash outlay of capital that needs to be deployed, that's very modest. We're not talking about $100 million. We're talking about a very, very small amount to get there. Where we stand right now is very exciting. Probably now that the markets in biotech is definitely globally picking up, all the big investment banks are talking about the market now picking up, especially biotech. And so we think we are not just from a development pathway perspective, but also from a market perspective. We're hitting the perfect timing to develop this company and to exit it at a really good time.
So I'm a heart failure cardiologist, but I did my MBA at London Business School, got very interested in the commercialization route. So through patents initially at Imperial College, we formed a company called Myotech that bought a company Hybrid to form Cyoxis that's now renamed Acamis Bio, and that signed deals in total over $1 billion to develop a series of drugs in the cancer, cachexia, and oncolytic viruses space. Then I bought back one of the programs that Acamis Bio wasn't doing fast enough, in my view, formed a company, Actimed, that we signed $126 million deal with Faraday Pharmaceuticals. And that's now going through a Series B round for $95 billion to go to a phase 3 indication, the first drug for cancer, cachexia. And I'm on the board of Bioventrix because I sold another company that developed a novel treatment for heart failure called Materacore, was sold to Bioventrix, and they've just completed a Series A fundraising. They've raised over $100 million altogether, developing a novel treatment, a procedural treatment for end-stage heart failure. So you can see the spaces I enjoy, and it's great fun. And honestly, of all these things, ESN Cleer, I think, it's got one of the best upsides.
I'll quickly just step you through the team, and I'm showing the team last, but I really want to show it first. The reason being is I believe that with this team, we can tackle anything. We've had every single team member that I'm showing here have been with the company for more than 4 years, or at least 4 years. And we've become a very, very tight-knit team that understand the strengths and weaknesses of each team members. And we work really, really well together. It's the best team I've ever had and ever built. Very proud of that. So I've introduced myself. Andrew has introduced himself. I'll quickly just step you through some of the other team members. So we've got Johnny Feng. He's executive director, but he's also chief commercial officer. He looks mainly after the back end, compliance, finance, accounting, and deals with the lawyers, luckily, not me. We've got Gustav de Bruin. As the name suggests, yes, he's a family member. He is my brother. But first and foremost, he is probably one of the best qualified COOs that I've ever seen. He's an electronic engineer. He completed an executive MBA, top of class, I think top 10% globally in an executive MBA. And he's got several other diplomas such as program management. He's got over 20 years experience in R&D, program management, business development, and a whole host of other specific skills that's relevant to ESN. Matt McNamara is a non-executive director. He's got a vast career of 30 years in healthcare and medical. He sits on several boards. He sits on 3 venture capital or life science venture capital companies. So really sitting on the other side of the fence and helps us guide the company towards success. On our R&D team, we've got Ron Lawrence, who's our internal chemist, Usha and Jyoti, who look after preclinical and drug compliance. Dr. Ralph Shitnelm is a proteomics specialist for the biomarkers, and George and Esther, who give us medical device regulatory advice. So on the capital structure and the raise, I'll just start with the left-hand side. We are raising a total round of 3 million euro, not all on capital sell, but our larger round is 3 million euro, which is the amount that we believe we need in order to get to and start a phase 2A clinical trial. In Australia, there's a very specific incentive that drags a lot of attention to Australia from international companies, and that is the R&D tax incentive. Essentially what it is a 43.5% offset, so R&D expenditure offset. That means if you spend $100,000, the government very literally gives you $43,500 back. So that's a real neat way to fund a lot of the R&D. Our company is quite simple in structure. We've got one company. We don't have a trust involved. There's only ordinary shares. We have on issue 12.9 million shares. And currently, the pre-money valuation is 18.6 million euro. On the bottom there's capital raise over the last 5 years. What our strategy has been so far is family, friends, and then it morphed into KOLs, and it became institutional investors. And really, right now, we're on that cusp of high net worth institutionals and potentially venture capital companies. We raised a total of 2.7 million euros so far in terms of equity, and then grants. We have received 2.1 million euro in grants, notably the IMCRC grant of 2.1 million. The Victoria Heart Institute, we received 300,000 euro, and then the R&D tax incentive of 1.2. So that gives us a total of 4.8 million euro that we've spent very frugally. We've been forced in probably the toughest biotech capital market the world has ever seen. We entered the world June 2018, and shortly after, when we just started developing the drug, when the expenses started becoming a lot more, COVID happened. Everyone was shut down and closing their houses. Very hard to raise money in that way, but we still progressed. We raised funds, and we are very proud to be here today to say that we're now a 5.5-year-old company, and we're really looking at that exit plan within the next 2 years. The use of funds. Essentially, what the money does for us is it develops the R&D for us, which involves the chemistry, the rodent model, and potentially some bridging tox work in a BAE study. In the deck here, we call a further de-risk drug safety study, and that's a BAE study, a bioequivalence and a bioavailability study, that in Australia, we can conduct such a study before IND. So you do that pre-IND, whereas in Europe and FDA, they don't allow that. You can only do such a study after you receive an IND. So again, a very strategic position for us being here in Australia. We can do that study and defer or delay our program. We can do that in parallel of the rodent study and the IND application, etc. We've got some working capital, of course, but also then further hiring top staff and kicking off a trial. We've got lawyer and accountants to pay, of course, and then further developing the IP and patent portfolio. So some of our key partners, we've got more than just the two that we're showing here, but these two are quite significant. Cymerys, they're GLP certified and in the process of achieving GMP certification. They support us with our chemistry towards GLP batches fit for clinical trials. Syngene, as mentioned, top 10 CRO, they're GMP certified. They help us with all our preclinical work and give us regulatory support. We also have LabCorp. It's one of the strongest, biggest regulatory consultancies globally, and they help us with our pathway to approval. On this slide, we're not necessarily showing an X and a Y axis. It's merely a step through development. You've got people and partners who've joined. We're not showing all of them, but we are showing some of them. The strategy and R&D, as we mentioned, it started with a biomarker and CDX strategy and then rolled into a drug focus, which is, of course, a lot more valuable when you get to an acquisition. And then the intellectual property, how that progressed over time. So essentially, the first patents that's granted, we actually acquired in 2018, 2019 from the Queensland University of Technology, which was specific biomarkers. We further developed them, and that was almost the kickstart of our portfolio, to be honest. Thank you, everyone. That's the presentation from us. I'm sure we'll follow with some questions, but thank you for your time and listening to our story.
I think it's a unique opportunity because it is so close to market and yet it's still very early stage. So we haven't burnt a lot of venture capital money. We're very much led by the founders, and hence there's an opportunity for us to be fast moving. We haven't wasted money on major infrastructure. It's very dedicated, and we've broken down barriers. So we're really very close now. Because we're repurposing a drug, we can go straight to a phase 2, and that can be quite small. And then we can have a single trial that could lead to approval in the US and Europe because we're going for previously untreatable orphan indications. So those combined factors with a de-risk drug that's well known in terms of its toxicology really means it's a very quick exit, which is honestly why I'm so excited about it.
And one thing that I might just add there, Andrew, which is quite astounding, is if you look at the top 10 pharmaceutical companies in the cardiovascular space, and then specifically with orphan drugs or without orphan drugs, really, they are increasing their orphan drug portfolios because of what I mentioned before, the increased pricing. So they can really get a lot of revenue for that. The FDA and EMA are really pushing for orphan drugs. Why? Is because they want the pharmaceutical companies to also focus on the smaller indications. They don't just want everyone to go for the big $500 million trial indications and then smaller subset just get left behind. So they've been honing in on these orphan drugs from a regulatory perspective. They've given them exclusivity. They're giving you a 9-year window of sales to get you into the market, to attract investors, to attract companies, to come and solve some of the big orphan indication challenges that we face. So what we've noticed is the top 10 pharmas are all increasing from around about 20% to around 30% of their portfolios now to become orphan over the next 5 years. So by 2028, we'll see some of the biggest pharmas have maybe twice or double the size of their portfolio being orphan drugs.
There's a question there in the Q&A from Michael Ferrance about what happens when the patent expires. So I think in general terms, I mean, nothing's protected forever from patent substitution, particularly if it's very successful. But our patents are very recent. So the old legacy drug is honestly so old that the synthetic route that was used had lots of impurities. So you really can't use that. There was a side effect associated with those impurities. So we have a completely new synthetic thing. It effectively is a new chemical entity, which means we've got a prolonged patent life. But also it's the only drug of its class. It's never been approved. So someone would have to duplicate the beneficial effects, and they couldn't start that work and get approval until our original patents are gone. And then there are other formulations and special work that will give us secondary patents on it. So yes, there will be generic substitution, but not for a decade or two. So there's plenty of runway. Yeah. The other feature that we've noticed, the cardiovascular world used to simply design drugs that were appeared for large disorders like hypertension that affects 30-40% of the adult population, lipid disorders or heart failure, and only get paid, €1 or so a day. But now they looked at the cancer world where people came up with drugs specific for very rare forms of cancer and got hundreds or thousands of euros per month in costs. So we're now duplicating that, and it's much more socially acceptable because effectively you're designing drugs specifically around a specific disease. So you get fewer side effects, much more targeted, and people are prepared to pay more for a drug that they know is going to a smaller number of people who really need it much more.
And Mavacamten is a good example, $100,000 list price, and they were acquired once approved, the drug got approved for obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Bristol Myers acquired them for $13 billion. And
they're not the only one. Tafamidis for transthyretin cardiamyloid was another one, which is much more analogous to what we do. Well, they're both analogous. They're specific forms of cardiomyopathy now with a specific treatment with very high prices achievable. Take that, Leo. It says, as the old saying goes, all good things take time, and it's 5 years since inception. Is there a clear time frame for any return? So maybe you'd like to explain that, Leo.
There absolutely is, James. So as I said before, we've got a very clear 2-year exit timeline, or potentially earlier. Why? Is because once we file the IND and once that IND is approved, which is 13, 14 months from now, we'd be a very, very good acquisition target for any pharma. The range of acquisition is, talking to the experts, it's around about between $300 and $600 million exit plan. It could be much more. Reason is valuations might be a little bit have decreased or is a little bit subdued currently. But as markets pick up, pharma have a very big war chest to spend on acquisitions. And as Andrew can expand on this, most pharmas do not have big innovation departments anymore. They have fired or made way with those departments, and they are typically just after acquiring a turnkey solution. So really, if we get to that point, or not if, but when we get to that point, we've got an IND in the hand and we are ready to run it to a trial. That could be a very, very good time for pharma to come in, acquire us and run the trial. That's what they're good at. And the big costs come in once you want to step into the market. So analogous to exploration and mining companies, we are very much the same. And as you can see with brokers in the capital markets, you've got brokers who focus on exploration and biotechs for a reason, because it's similar risks, similar returns, similar timelines, similar cost, there or thereabouts. So what I'm saying is we are developing a drug, but we are not the company to go to market, raise $4 billion, and then put it into pharmacies and sell it. That's not our job. That's going to be a big pharma's job. So we are looking at, so let's say, an 18-month to 24-month timeline where we can exit to a big pharma that can take it from there.
Now, James has got a further question around the investment pipeline. So you've already said that our exit may well be a trade sale or an out licensing deal, but this isn't the only round. So what would you say would be the funds raised in this particular round, and then where would we get to, and what's the next round likely to be?
Okay, so as the old saying goes, one's crystal ball is better than the other. If we can raise €3 million now in this round, that will be enough funding for us to get to IND and start the phase 2A trial. If not in this round, we'll raise again. So if we raise 1.5 in 6 months, 9 months, when we have the rodent model completed, and just before we file the IND, we'll do another round to fund a phase 2A trial. So it all depends on when the capital comes in. We need the capital. We can't develop and run trials with, out of thin air. And if the funding isn't there right now because markets might be subdued, we'll shorten the time frame to the next investment. But it always really ends up in the same way. So if there's one big €3 million raise now, we don't need to raise for another 12 months. If it's half, we'll probably raise in another 6 months or so. Guys, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. There's a few time zones, no doubt, of people who's logged in, but we thank you. This is a very passionate project for us. We, Andrew and I, but the rest of the team as well, we've put in a lot of effort. We believe in this project. We think it's important. We didn't start this company on the thinking that it's just about money. It's not. It's people's lives, and it's important. Many people suffer from this. My family definitely. My dad's one of 9. Most of them suffer from heart disease, and unfortunately, but it's one of the largest killers in the world, and we've got to do something about it. So we've put our necks on the line and our investors' money, and we've come very far. We've done really well. We've kicked many goals. And we really want to get that last push to get this across the line. And with your help, we can do that. Thank you.
Just like to say, we are, as Leo said, a very small, very dedicated team, passionate about the work we're doing. I've treated patients the whole of my life, and I know there are still areas that we have a major amount of work to do. So if you join us, we're looking forward to working with you to achieve something for these patients with the devastating restrictive cardiomyopathy.